Variety. The neutral term that has come to be used normally for such group-specific language form is a variety. Any set of language habit that is shared by a certain group of speakers for use in certain contexts constitute such as variety. The term is closely related to that of dialect, which also denote language form associated with certain group of people, but is usually associated with given like region, hence regional dialect or social class or a group or a social dialect. So normally we use the word variety, right? And it is closely related to the word dialect, which refer to when there variation like in language based on region or based on social class. If there is variation based on social class, so we call it social dialect. And if the variation exists on the region, based on region, we call it regional dialect. Now here we will discuss register. Similarly, register refer to stylistically defined language varieties associated with certain channels such as spoken or written, or situational context, for example, letter writing, texting, or giving a political speech. So what is register? Register is also a language variety, but that is a stylistically defined language variety, right? And it depends on whether you are using like a spoken variety of a language, or you are using a written variety of a language, or you are in a particular situation or in a particular context. For example, you're writing a letter, you're texting, or giving a political speech. So in a political speech, you are going to use one kind of language, or in a texting, like text messages or WhatsApp, you will use other kind of language. Or if you are using like formal writing letters, so that would be other kind of language. Or if you're using like a spoken language, so that would be informal most often. And if you are using like written language, so that would be a formal one. So register is a stylistically defined language variety. It's also variety, but it is stylistically defined language. By stylistically, we mean that whether you are using like a written form or spoken form, you are texting or you are writing letter or you are giving a political speech. The notion of accent relates to pronunciation only. When we talk about accent, so accent is variation based on pronunciation, right? But otherwise conform largely to the reference of dialect. So we can say that accent also is the part of a dialect, okay? Accent is included in a dialect. Similarly, that when we define that accent, so we say variation based on pronunciation, and dialect variation based on grammar, like vocabulary and syntactic structure. Here they say that the notion of accent relate to pronunciation on is only concerned with pronunciation accent. And when we say that dialect, so in dialect we have then everything. But otherwise conform largely to the reference of dialect. We can talk of Welsh, Indian or Otago accent for dialect. So when we talk about accent, so we talk about dialect like. Standard language. What is a standard language? The language forms usually label standard. Standard British English, for instance, also describe a certain speech form shared by certain speaker for use in certain situation, right? For example, when you are on a formal occasion, so you are going to use a standard English in British. You're writing, you're giving a formal speech or there's ceremony, right? So then we are going to use a standard form of English. Probably educated ones from elsewhere in the British Isles performing in formal or public context. In this case, as a communicative system, however, standard English is not inherently superior or better. So we can't say that a standard form of English is superior to other form of English, right? But we can say that a standard form of English is used in a formal situation, right? On a formal occasion, while we use like other forms of variety of English, that is for the purpose of communication, right? So inherently superior to or better than any regional dialect. So standard form of English is not better than other regional dialect. It just happened to be associated with situations and speaker more laden with official or public prestige. So when you are giving like a formal speech, okay, or you are giving like a official statement, or this is a formal ceremony, so then you are using like a standard form of English, right? And mostly it's used by educated people. Here we continue standard English. However, using like a posh received pronunciation accent would be equally out of place and largely suddenly socially ineffective in like a Glyphagian's pub or in a hospital in Kampala, as would be speaking with a strong Scottish working class accent in a London business meeting. So it means that this standard form of English will not work everywhere. You're in a hospital, so then you cannot use standard form of English. Then you will use what? A kind that is used by working class, right? So in communication matters, it is linguistic and situational appropriateness that counts. So when we communicate, so it's not matter whether you are correct or you are incorrect. What matters whether you can communicate effectively or not, whether you are understandable to the person you are speaking to or not. So in communication, what matters, that is appropriateness, whether you are appropriate, you are understandable or not, that counts. Your correct form or standard form, it does not. You are in hospital, for example. You are on the street, for example, and you are using a standard form of English. So people might not understand. So that kind of language will not work. So what is the purpose of using then standard form of English? A standard form should be used on a proper occasion. For communicative purpose, you have to use such kind of dialect which works for you. So in communication, it says that what matters is a linguistic and situational appropriateness. For example, you are in a market. So that is like you have to see that what is situation appropriates for the market. You have to use like vernacular form of language of English. Or you are with a friend. So you have to use that situation appropriateness. You are with your family member. So you have to use that kind of language which will work for you. Right? So a standard form of language will not work in every situation. Right? Not some like a supposedly inherent notion of correctness. So for communication, it does not matter whether you are correct or you are incorrect. For communication, it matters whether you are situationally appropriate or not. Right? This is okay what it says. Dialect of the same or different language system. Deciding whether any two language system or dialect of the same language or different language may seem trivial, right? It might seem to you trivial, okay, something that is very ordinary, but it is not at all. The usual criterion is mutual intelligibility, okay? We say that this is dialect of the same language, which is mutual intelligible. What does mean by mutual intelligibility? By mutual intelligibility, we mean that if you understand other person you're communicating to, and he or she is speaking differently, but you understand, so that would be the same dialect, different dialect of the same language, right? If you are understandable to another person, you're speaking differently, another person speaking differently, but you two are understandable to each other. So that would be what? Different dialects of the same language. There'll be mutually intelligibility. And if you do not understand the other person, that would be a different language. For example, let's talk about Pashto language, right? So I'm speaking Yusufzai dialect and someone else is speaking Marwat dialect, or the dialect of Karak, or the dialect of Banu, or the dialect of Kohart. So if I understand, so it means that these all are the dialect of the same language, that is Pashto. And if somebody comes, okay, and he or she like speaks in other language, suppose Balochi language, and I do not understand, so then that would be a different language. So a Balochi and Pashto are different languages because we do not understand each other. But here, the dialect of Karak, Kohart, Yusufzai, so these people understand each other, so they would be the different dialects of the same language. So it's okay, mutual intelligibility. Speakers of a different dialects of the same language are assumed to be understand each other. Speaker of languages don't. So if two people speak different languages, they will not understand each other. And if two people speak different dialects, they will understand each other, right? But this is not like a good criteria. We know that if somebody comes from India and a person speaks Hindi language and I speak Urdu language, but still I understand the person who comes from India. So whether their Hindi and Urdu are two dialects of the same language or they are two different languages, we consider Hindi as a separate language, a different language, and Urdu a different language. But according to this definition, that mutual intelligibility, because most often we watch Indian movies and we understand. So if we understand, it means that they are the dialect of the same language. Like we do not consider them dialects of the same language. We deal them with different languages. So this is issue. And sometime, for example, if a person comes from southern part of this Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, suppose come from Marwat district, from Karak district, or from Banu district, and if they use vernacular kind of dialect, okay, in every life situation, so I might not understand. So if I do not understand, the person who comes from Lake Marwat, or from Kohart, or from Banu, okay, so what should I think? That should I consider the person who comes from Kohart, Khatak dialect, a different language, Karak dialect, a different language, Banuchi dialect, a different language, Marwat dialect, a different language, or they are dialects of the same language? It's a question. So this mutual intelligibility, it does not work all the time. There are problems, right? We will discuss more now. Now, language versus dialect. But it is not that easy, okay, that mutual intelligibility will not work all the time. Understanding is not all or nothing matter. And it is also a contextually dependent social activity, not a firm property of any language form, right? It's not like the property of a language form. Sometimes it is a social activity. For example, what if we roughly understand each other without really getting the detail? Sometimes we understand each other, but we don't get the detail. So still understanding is there. So should we consider this like a different dialect of the same language? Not at all. Sometimes we understand a little bit Arabic, or a little bit French, or a little bit Persian. So if we understand what somebody is saying and we do not completely understand, so whether it would be like a dialect or a language, it's a question, right? Or what the other person is saying, if we are just able to identify what the topic of an utterance is but don't really get the message. What if you only the topic of discussion but we don't understand completely? Would it be like a different dialect or a different language? If we just pick up one or the other word but little more without overall comprehension of the intended meaning, which of these versions count as understanding? Right? It's also a question, right? That if We just pick up one or the other word but little more. Without oral we do not understand oral comprehension, but we understand one or two words, right, of the intended meaning. Which of these versions count as understanding? What will you think of understanding? What is understanding? It's a question, right? Now, what is understanding? Beside the assumption that speakers of a different dialect of the same language understand each other is also clearly open to challenge. How? I very much doubt whether the elderly Scottish fisherman from the coast near Aberdeen and London adolescents speaking the city's current mix of leftover Cockney and Caribbeans inspire you slang yet get along each other linguistically when each of them just speak in their own vernacular. Sometimes it happens, right, that people will use different dialect of the same language, but they will not understand each other. So what we consider then? It should be different languages or different dialect. This is a question, right? Language and dialect distinct politically. So if the distinction exists between language and dialect, it is politically. Linguists have come up to recognize that the distinction between languages and dialect is essentially a political one, epitomized that the widely quoted phrase that language is dialect within an army and navy, coined by a Yiddish linguist Max Weinrich. Language forms spoken in different nation states are commonly considered languages, right? Like Danish, Swedish or Norwegians. Even they are very similar and mutually largely intelligible. So these languages, like we say Danish, Swedish or Norwegians, they are mutually intelligible and people understand each other, but they are marked as different languages. Danish is a different language, Swedish is a different language, and Norwegian is a different language. We have also example of Urdu and Hindi, right? Because the people who speak Urdu also understand the people who speak Hindi. But still, politically, they are divided into different nations or different countries. So these people like Danish, Swedish or Norwegians, these languages are mutually intelligible and people understand each other, but they are marked as different languages. So they were supposed to be marked as dialect of the same language. Same as Urdu and Hindi or Punjabi, they should also be marked as dialects of the same language. But here we say that Punjabi is a different language, Urdu is a different language, and Hindi is a different language. So that is a political division, right? Even if they are very similar and mutually largely intelligible. So language forms spoken is one nation are usually labeled dialect. Like Cantonese, Hokkien and Mandarins. In China even they are far from mutually intelligible. So here we can see that these dialect of Chinese language, one is Cantonese and Hokkien and Mandarin. So these are the dialect of a language of Chinese. Even they are not intelligible, but they are spoken within the boundaries of a country. Same as I told you that we are living in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and sometimes we do not understand some of the dialect which are spoken in southern part of this province. But still we consider them dialects of the same language, Pashto. Right? Now, we can conclude this discussion. So to sum up this, so a language is not a monolithic entity. In reality, it comes in many shading. In varieties, a dialect and such varieties are all linguistic system which is their respective contexts are communicatively fully efficient. Regular and grammatical grammar in this sense is knowledge of speech habits of how to do things linguistically, how to encode and decode the thought-sound relationship that makes up communication. It is knowledge acquired that held subconsciously and shared by all members of speech communities. So we can sum up this discussion that language is something that is not monolithic, right? It's not like a single entity. It comes in variety. In reality, it comes in different shapes, in different shadings, in varieties and dialect. And such varieties are all linguistic systems, right? And which in their respective contexts are communicatively fully efficient. So all these dialects are fully efficient, regular and grammatical. When you say grammatical, so we mean that the knowledge of the language the people are having. So grammar in this sense is knowledge of speech habits, of how to do things linguistically, how to encode and decode the thought-sound relationship that makes up communication. It is knowledge acquired and held subconsciously and shared by all members of a speech community. So thank you so much. It was a detailed discussion on language variation, and we discussed that what are the causes of language variation, and we discussed variation at phonological level, lexical level, syntactic level. We talk in detail about the difference between dialect and language, and this distinction is totally political, right? So please provide your valuable comment, and don't forget to subscribe and like the channel. This will motivate me to upload more videos of your interests, right? So language, we have a last slide that language varieties include standard language and like national varieties, but also regional, social and ethnic dialect. Group specific language forms contextually and stylistically define expression and so on for use in the respective cultural contexts. Thank you so much.